what is your opinion on the security or invasion of privacy issue if that information is collected once a month?
Well, I think that there are two issues. One is how often it's collected, and the other is what the interval is, what the data acquisition interval is, whether it's 1 minute, 5 minutes, 15 minutes, 1 hour, whatever that is, because that reveals that any of that data can be used to reveal a great deal about what is taking place in the premises. But obviously, the more frequently the data is gathered, the more granular, as they call it, the more it exposes the activities on the premises.
And you were present when there was testimony as it relates to how this data would be used, and that IPL has stated that it would not sell the data. Do you believe the data would be used in any other means?
I think that once the data is collected, you have absolutely no control. Even IPL may not have control over where the data goes. We've seen that with the Marriott Hotel last week. The data was collected for one purpose, and it ends up going places no one imagines. That's just the way it is now. I used to be the secretariat for 10 years for the International Standards Committee, ISO, IEC Committee for Data Management and Interchange. So I had a lot of experience with what happens with data and how big data is managed.
Then am I correct to state that it's your position that any data that's collected is at risk, therefore it should not be collected at all?
The best way to protect data is to not collect it in the first place.
Right. Mr. Marcus, do you have any redirect?
Yes, Mr. Schoechle, you were asked some questions about hacking, and there was a discussion about the meters being hacked into as compared to the endpoint. You mentioned that the meters are, smart meters are inexpensive, and as a result of that, I think you said that hacking is potentially more of a problem. Is that correct?
Yes.
Is it difficult, easy to hack into a particular meter itself rather than the endpoint, but the meter on somebody's house or at somebody's office building?
Well, I won't say it's easy, but there's a lot of expertise around them. Any ham radio operator could figure out how to, that's really, there are a lot of those people are very committed and incredible nerds. They will figure out how to get into something like that if they really want to, just for enjoyment, and maybe for people can then therefore do it for nefarious purposes too. But it's possible. I'm saying I don't think I think the greater threat is the database itself. But I do think it's possible to hack a meter. Sure.
Do you know whether it's more difficult or easier to hack if you have a dedicated bandwidth that you've licensed as compared to using the streaming that's, I'm not sure I'm expressing this correctly, but Census has said that, its signal can go 10 miles because it has licensed a specific signal and there's a low signal to noise ratio. Is there any drawback from a hacking perspective if you have a dedicated frequency like that?
Well, it makes parts of the hacking easier. Maybe other parts are harder. But the part that is easier is that you can isolate the signal, the specific source, the specific meter. In a typical mesh network was used by a lot of other AMI systems. It's a kind of a nightmare because there's so much data traffic. But in this case, you could isolate it more easily.
Okay. And you were asked about page 17, line 19 of your rebuttal testimony, and the fact that Mr. Stetzer's and Ms. Matera's measurements in Dubuque at that one particular location have now been detracted because of the confusion of whether it was the electric meter or Black Hill's gas meter. Do you recall that testimony?
Just what I heard today. I had not previously, wasn't aware of that.
But since the date of your testimony was September 21st, you're familiar with the IPL testimony about, even in Wisconsin, how many times these meters can pulse. Did you learn that since your testimony in September 21st?
I was aware of that part, and I had a comment about that is that regardless of what the pulsing rate is, initially it can be changed anytime, and there's absolutely no assurance that it won't be changed the next day. I mean, it could be changed anytime. You could there is no assurance whatsoever that pulse rate will remain the same.
Okay. And do you know enough about meters to know that that's the case, that it's easy to change the pulsing of meters?
Yeah, they're all programmable in that respect.
Do you know then how a meter would read and only transmit 1 time a week? Is that something that would have to be programmed, to your knowledge?
Those are parameters that are set in the meter.
Okay.
Yeah.
So it has to be programmed that way.
Yeah, it's a setup, or many of them are you can dynamically change those parameters over the network.
I have no further questions.